Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofits, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're chatting with Creative West's leadership. Just so wonderful to have you here. We have Christian Gaines, who is the Creative West's Executive Director, and Board Chair Bassem Bejjani, medical doctor as well. And I am so happy to have you here. Christian, we recruited you to the position, and in the intervening years, you have just helped to transform the organization with your board. Bassem, we'll get a scorecard on Christian in the course of this discussion. But Christian, let's start off with you talking about Creative West and how you've helped the organization fulfill its promise to support the creative activities of all these diverse arts organizations that serve these different communities across the Western United States.
Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me today. It really is wonderful to be here. I think it was about 6 years ago that we first met, maybe a little longer than that. And yes, as you mentioned, a lot has changed at Creative West, including cosmetically, perhaps our name. For the last several decades, we were the Western States Arts Federation. And last year, we underwent a extensive rebranding, remessaging, and renaming process into Creative West, which is what we're known as today in our 51st year in existence. So, and we're one of 6 U.S. regional arts organizations that spread out across the United States. We're part of I would say, an arts and culture and creative economy ecosystem. Organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, which, as we know, are very much under threat right now, and then other organizations like the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, Americans for the Arts, and other advocacy and service organizations kind of take care of sort of the federal landscape, and then at the regional landscape, regional part of this ecosystem is the regional arts organizations, and Creative West is one. So we cover 16 states and jurisdictions, 13 states, all the states that are west of Colorado, including Alaska and Hawaii, and then the 3 Pacific U.S. jurisdictions of Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. And we support creativity in all of those places. So we build equitable funding, advocacy, policy, and technology systems to generate creative capacity in the West as well as beyond. Essentially, we build systems that replace outdated systems that are not equitable, that are part of a bygone era, and replacing it so that they can be as responsive and agile to the communities that we serve across the United States.
Now, Bassem, I think it's really fascinating to have a medical doctor here, a very creative field, one that affects us all, right? Our human health it's reliant on the development of new treatments, cures, new understanding of the human body. This whole idea of creativity is so near and dear to the medical profession. Talk a little bit about why you got involved in Creative West, and then I'd like to actually follow up with another question. But let's start off just talking about your motivations for being involved and that of your colleagues.
Sure. Thank you. First, also thank you for finding Christian for us. You asked me about a grade for him. It's A+. So I started working with Creative West about the same time when Christian joined. So in 2018 is when I started my service on the board. But I've been involved with the arts now for about 20 years or so as a supporter of the arts and on service on various boards. And part of it is because as a physician, I'm a geneticist and I'm a developmental biologist. So I approach arts not just as a form of personal or cultural expression, but as something that's deeply rooted in our biology and in our evolutionary history. So my fellow board members and I care about art because it's fundamental to what makes us human. art is not a luxury. It is a necessity that's woven into our cognitive, emotional, and social development. There is a researcher here in the Seattle area. She did quite a bit of work on the evolutionary origin of art. Her name is Ellen Dissanayake, and she argues that art is not an arbitrary cultural invention, but rather it's an intrinsic part of human life. So she describes it as making special, a deeply ingrained behavior that has been present throughout human history in all cultures. Early humans used art in rituals, in storytelling, and in symbolic expression, not for decoration alone, but to create meaning, to strengthen social bonds, and to foster cohesion within communities. And this remains true today. Art allows us to externalize our experiences, to navigate emotions, and to connect with one another in ways that words and logic cannot achieve. So, in summary, art is what makes us human and what makes society possible, too.
And it also it incites thinking beyond what exists, right? Art is really about walking that edge between what is and what could be. What can imagine today and is tactilely experiential, and what could be experienced if you just took a little bit of a different viewpoint, whether it's literature in terms of how words are expressed, or whether it's an image, or whether it's a sound. You're creating these new ideas, which then can inform people who are not in the arts arena per se, but that artistic expression can find its way into the medical profession.
If I may share an anecdote from my experience about that, the point you just made. So as I said earlier, I was in academia and then I moved into biotechnology. So I was a co-founder of a biotech company, and we were developing new technology for diagnostics. And we had an R&D department. So the way we built our R&D department is we would identify the most talented and creative people who are working in the lab and take them and tell them, would you like to be in the R&D department? And I could tell you without any exception, all of those folks had some background in art. They were either musicians also, and actually a group of them created a band from the lab. They called it the R&Ds. Right. So they were really invested in art as a creative engine to their work in the sciences. So we cannot separate creativity that, oh, this is right brain, left brain. Creativity is what makes us human, and it is both in the arts and the sciences, and definitely in medicine.
I want to talk a little bit about the Creative West's identity as a supplier of services, as a convener, as an organizer. Every sector, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the extractive industries of oil and gas and mineral extractions. Every sector, whether we're talking about the services sector, the financial sector, the medical sector, logistics, shipping, all of them have organizations that create a hospitable environment for each of the entities that are members to function. Christian, how do you see that functioning happening in the creative sectors, which, by the way, are responsible for tourist dollars? They're responsible for joyful experiences. They're responsible for education. They're responsible for the economic vitality of whole communities, adding 10, 20, 30% to the domestic product in those regions. How do you see this organizing function that you play?
Well, thanks for putting it that way. I think that that organizing function is absolutely essential. And yes, beyond a lot of the ancillary necessities of arts in culture and society, in humanity, as you mentioned, the arts are also, of course, contribute to the economic vitality of the United States. In fact, the Bureau of Economic Analysis actually made it a sector of the GDP in as recently as 2015. So every 2 years, just like every other sector, arts, culture, the creative economy is measured, and 2023 yielded about $1.2 trillion. It's about 6% of the GDP, and it employs over 5 million people. So the arts are big business, as you suggest. And yes, just like other sectors, the sectors that you described, it's essential for those in arts and culture to be able to convene, and to be able to learn best practices and to be able to understand from each other. And that does happen in a variety of ways. And perhaps I'll just give you an example. A big core activity of Creative West is arts advocacy. So we work really hard at a local, at a state, and at a federal level to be able to advocate for arts and culture and the creative economy. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, it's a variety of different activities. And perhaps one of the most visceral activities is to actually go to Washington, D.C., go to the Hill and visit with your elected representatives and remind them about the power of arts and culture in society, and especially, of course, in their own districts. And so that's something that we do as an organization every 2 years. We train delegates from each state across the West. We provide them with talking points, and with a way to be able to express those talking points with confidence and enthusiasm. And we bring them to Washington, D.C., and then they book a lot of meetings. And this is not the only mechanism of democracy, but it is an important mechanism of democracy. And to be able to actually go and visit with your elected representative and remind them that the arts generate revenues across other sectors, that the arts improve education outcomes, that the arts foster good health and well-being.
You provide grants and awards. You do events. You foster regional networking, and then you also support the state agencies. I'd like to talk about the whole idea of defining art. What is art, and who owns art, and art for whom? One of the things that I think is so interesting, at least in my experience, I'd love to have both of you weigh in about yours. I love learning about people who are different than I am, and I love sharing things from my culture, both who are with people who are different than me. It's one thing to talk in your family or in your culture to other people who share that. We all have the similar reference points, but don't you love it when you're sharing with somebody who's completely different, who doesn't know your culture? Bassem, you come from a Lebanese background, and wow, I mean, what an amazing, diverse culture, right? From the Phoenicians and the various waves of immigration and the various religions and so on. Is that how you think about art? Is this sort of exchange amongst people who have different ideas, different identities, different cultures?
Absolutely. I again, thank you. I mean, you're bringing points that motivate me in life and keep me going. So yes, you're absolutely right. Especially growing up in Lebanon, there are 18 different religious sects that are recognized in Lebanon, which is a blessing when you think about diversity, but at the same time, we have our own problems too. But yeah, so art allows you to become empathetic and see some other person's point of view that you wouldn't think about otherwise. That's why I'm involved with another organization. I don't know if I can say that, but Caravan Arts was an organization that was started by a good friend of mine, Paul Gordon Chandler, when he was a minister in Egypt. Okay. And he was using art in the church that he had in Cairo, Egypt, to bring people from various backgrounds, Muslim and Christian and otherwise, to come and talk about the art in a way that is non-threatening, but that would bring different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds to be able to have a conversation in a non-threatening way, because you're bringing art now as a way to show the similarities between people. There is no other in the art. We're all in it the same way.
And we all have that common vocabulary. Now, Bassem, you talk about the how amazingly diverse Lebanon is. Look at just, Christian, what you have to cover amongst, I don't know, native tribes in the United States, right? I mean, if you're in the West, right, you've got the various Hawaiian peoples, you've got the various Alaskan peoples, you've got the various peoples in the lower 48, right? And each of those cultures need to be honored and addressed. And then you have all the different folks from different Latin Hispanic communities, Asian communities, various white European communities, the African American communities all across the United States are incredibly rich. How do you actually function? I mean, you cannot have. I mean, Sammy Davis used to talk about the fact that he was a one-eyed black Jewish guy. So if somebody was going to go against somebody, they were going to target him, right? Because they got a threefer. How do you deal with things? Because you can't have one of each of us in the United States, right? You can't even cover Lebanon with your staff, right? How do you cover the United States?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that we're constantly um, analyzing and updating and developing and building our networks and our communities, and always asking ourselves who's at the table and who's not at the table.
So it's partnerships, right? It's listening.
Very much so. Yes, we have dozens of various networks that cover all across our region, all of the races and ethnicities and regions as you described. An example of this, which is one that you actually didn't describe, is a region, the Pacific or the Blue Continent region, that has recently been added to our Western region since 2019, and that is the 3 U.S. territories. We say jurisdictions of Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and American Samoa, south, hard South Pacific,
and that's just not one. It's not one generic peoples,
no,
right?
no, we're talking, it's the Chamorro people, it's the Carolinian people, it's the Samoan people. They have diasporas that outnumber the population of their home islands throughout the United States. And they are often, because they are so remote, they are often or always forgotten and overlooked when it comes to everything. But in the case of arts and culture and the creative economy, overlooked there too. And we have a responsibility to bring them to the table. And just because it's so far and so often overlooked is not a reason to exclude them. What I'm always fond of saying is, like, casual exclusion is the most common form of exclusion that there is, and it's not a malevolent. It's too far. It's too far. It's too expensive. We're not thinking about it. We can't. We can't serve them. And I sort of feel like we have a responsibility to, and really incredible applied arts. Obviously kind of weaving and carving and tattoo artistry and floral design and sail making and wayfinding and navigating, and like just so many different applied art forms that those regions represent, and to be able to bring them into the community of the Western regional community and say, like, look who's not at the table. And to be able to include representatives, artists, arts organizations, state arts agencies, advocacy organizations from those from those places to include them at the table in conversations around public policy, around funding, around advocacy, and so on. So, that has been so exciting for the organization, I think, because it has given us kind of a new perspective on how we define our region.
How do you both deal? So when you're learning new stuff, and Christian, thank you so much for including tattoo artistry, sail making, all these different crafts that are art forms that, because they don't hang up in a museum and they're not in oil or whatever, they're not really recognized by many institutions as art forms. On the other hand, you go to the Anchorage Museum and they've had exhibitions of tattoo artistry. You go to different institutions and you find clay pottery, three-dimensional works, or different salmon skin bags using salmon leather, right? All these different elements are all there, and they're all part of an artistic heritage. But my question is this: if you're learning new stuff, it starts off with somebody saying you didn't know some things. It starts off with criticism. How do you deal with that emotionally?
The way I think about it is you deal with it with kindness, but also I think to appealing to the sense of curiosity that people have. So, and this is a natural thing that's ingrained in us also. Curiosity is what makes us explore as humans. What made somebody go across the continental US? It was what's out there, what's beyond the horizon. So it doesn't take a whole lot of a nudge to help somebody explore a different culture. They have to get over maybe perhaps some biases or some prejudices about it. I mean, when you talked earlier now, you said, the art that they talk about, like tattoo and making vessels, is not the kind that hangs on the wall. What hangs on the wall is a very Eurocentric form of culture. Which is natural that this is the dominant culture in the United States. But now in 2025, we are waking up to say, wait a minute, we contain multitudes, and we spent our first 250 years being centered on what is familiar to us, which is natural. But now it's time to explore. It's time to be open to other things because it's very enriching. And this is why the United States is kind of unique that way, because we do contain these multitudes and we are opening up to them.
Christian, when I listen to the music that is coming out today and how it's inflected by all these different cultures, and you find these rhythms and these musical forms and these tonality that come out of different cultures, how do you see Creative West's role in encouraging that kind of exchange and cross-fertilization? Or does it just sort of happen and then you're kind of sort of standing beside and watching it unfold?
Well, I would say I would go back to we're constantly examining and hopefully expanding our definition of an artist. And that is what I think is really important. That is a fluid, flexible concept, and it needs to be. So that's what I would first say. I think the second thing too, and this is to Bassem's point, and I wanted to make sure I got this out. Often we look at, as Bassem was saying, we look at all kinds of things through a kind of a Western Eurocentric lens. And that's not just art or literature or anything. It can often be practices, and especially practices within arts and culture, and the arts and culture sector. For example, grant making, and grant making has often been constrained by strictures that have just been in place for decades, that are easy for big nonprofit organizations with big development staffs to be able to produce a fully audited financial statement and get their 501c3 nonprofit status and do all of these things. But lots and lots of organizations don't have access to that power. And so what we are constantly looking at is how do we redistribute wealth in a way that is trust-based, that is liberatory, and that connects artists and culture bearers and communities and gets out of the way so that they can do great work.
I would like to just suggest a different terminology. It's not
Sure.
about redistributing wealth. I would like to suggest, and totally respectfully, Christian,
Hmm. Hmm.
I would like to suggest that what you're talking about is investing in innovation. That
Yes.
if you only are investing in the people who have achieved scale and have all that infrastructure that you've described,
Yes.
then you're basically leaving behind those innovators who are coming up from the ground up. So what you're
Without
doing,
question.
you're
Yes.
you're, you're allowing room in this organization, which is a very significant scale, very significant impact. But what you're saying is we have to have an investment portfolio that treats the true innovators at a small scale like angel investors. You are an angel investor.
Yes, to create a more inclusive society, a more equitable society, one that strengthens the arts and recognizes the arts for the contributions that it makes to society, beyond, as Bassem was saying, a nice to have or a luxury, way, way, way beyond that, and to actually recognize its capacity to actually catalyze change.
As you both are thinking about the future of Creative West, you've gone through a really superb evolution since you've come in, Christian. The last 7 years have been fabulous. If you're looking over the next several years, what is the things that your heart's desires are? And let's start off with you, Bassem, and then we'll go to Christian and give you the last word, Christian. Your heart's desire for the organization over the next several years, because we're entering into a situation in which we're seeing funding at the government level being systematically reduced when it comes to arts. Even on the regional level, we're seeing that systematically. And we're also seeing definitions, top-down definitions of what art should be. And we know how artists love being told by authorities what their art should be, right? So, Bassem, what is your hope for Creative West? And then Christian, if you could take us out.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't go into the specifics. I'll just let Christian talk because he and we are in dialogue all the time about it. But so there are a few things that are like the basics, right? So keep doing what we're doing, do it better, do it to more organizations and to more artists. Don't fall behind the time. Continue being innovative on how we provide these grants, to whom we give them, etc. The question now is how do you do that? Part of it also includes not only engaging community and then ramping up our advocacy and educational efforts, but also technology. Christian mentioned earlier that we are an organization that provides also technology for artists and art organization. So there is a lot of thinking and discussions that's also now focusing on how can we use the new technologies that are coming out in empowering artists and art organizations to have better access to what they need so that they can create. So, Christian, you may want to add to that and
Take
provide.
it away, Christian.
Yeah. I mean, when you ask like where do you want to be in 5 years? We have 350,000 users. We'd like to get to 1 million users for our technology products. So there's a few of those. We want to have a deeper and richer storytelling culture. We want to have more financial diversification and resilience. We want our grant making to become more equitable, more trust-based. We want to make sure that everyone is at the table. So, all of that. I think that like a lot of nonprofits, we have a mission, we have a vision, we have values as an organization. I keep on thinking about what it means to have an ethos as an organization and like what our ethos might be in 5 years. So what people think of when they think of us. We have a lot of different kinds of parts of our community. We have technology customers, we have advocates, we have grantees and applicants. We have state arts agencies. We have a lot of different kinds of people who approach our organization for different programs, services, and activities. I would love them to all think of us in the same way because we actually have an ethos. And when I think of an ethos, I think of companies like Patagonia or Costco or, who have a rich embedded idea of who they are. And we definitely have our values, and our values are very, very important to the organization. But to have an ethos that is shot through every program, every service, every activity, that every customer, every user, every person who intersects with our organization instantly gets it and understands, I think is about 5 years away.
I think that that's really important. This idea of values as being your thematic cohesion, right? This idea of all of these services, all this grant making comes from that ethos. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you're saying that you will evolve, but you will always evolve according to that ethos. This isn't a chase for dollars where you in your attempt to monetize, you'll basically have an ethical standard that is infinitely malleable. Instead, you have a set of values, a set of ideas that around which you organize as opposed to the other way around. That's just so wonderful. I'd like to thank you both for sharing the work of Creative West. Christian Gaines, the executive director of Creative West, and Bassem Bejjani, the board chair of Creative West. I'd like to also thank, from our hearts to yours, your staff, your funders, your board members, your volunteers, your artists. My goodness, what a wonderful, wonderful piece of work that you're doing. It helps us all and makes our world better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.